Well, in preparation for this talk, I was thinking through, this can be a very morbid, kind of ghoulish talk in a way, right? You're thinking about, well, when I die. And here's my first thought on that. If everything we talked about happened just when we talk about it, you'd all be lottery winners. It's just talking about something doesn't make it happen, right? So always keep that in mind. That's preparation. So I'm so pleased we're able to serve your families well with bringing up the topic. Even if you start the topic with, well, I was at a church the other day and they were talking about writing your obituary and funeral and things like that, and at least you've got an open door to talk to somebody about it, whether it's a family member or elderly parents or children or whoever, So I thought that was good. There's also a reality of being a truth teller. There will come a day when we will all die. That's the way it is. That's the order of life. So there's a humility that comes with, I want to live my life well, in good relationship with God and others, but I also know that one of these days it's going to come to an end. And so I want to be prepared for that. I believe planning all of these kinds of things we're talking about today is a real gift to the people that you leave behind. If you've planned your service, if you've planned your estate well, if you've taken care of your advance directives and things like that, you've already made choices about your life and how you want the last chapter of your life to go. And so then all you have to do is hand off the plan to your survivors and say, this is what I want, follow the plan. And they don't have to make really hard decisions, or they don't have to fight over who gets what or those kinds of things. They don't have to fight about where the funeral's going to be or any of that stuff. You've already decided. My personal take on it is your life is your responsibility. God gave you your life. He didn't give it to your children or your spouse or whoever it is. So you make those decisions with input from others and advice and suggestions and things like that. So when I'm gone, this is what I'd like to have you do for me and as part of it. Having a good funeral is really important. And so I'm going to save that for the second half. I want to start off really with thinking about your obituary and your eulogy. And I'm going to use a secular author here. Stephen Covey has passed away now, but back in the day, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People was a really popular leadership type of book. And one of the chapters in it is called Begin with the End in Mind. So like Mike was saying, you want to know where you're going to land before you jump, right? So it's a way of thinking through your life. At the end of my life, what do I want it to be like? So I want to live that way. And I wanted to read a passage out of his book. It's in the introduction. It's just a few paragraphs. Covey wrote this. He says, focus with me and really open your mind. So use your imagination. In your mind's eye, see yourself going to the funeral of a loved one. Picture yourself driving to the funeral parlor or chapel, parking the car and getting out. As you walk inside the building, you notice the flowers, the soft organ music. You see the faces of friends and family you pass along the way. You feel the shared sorrow of losing, the joy of having known that radiates from the hearts of the people there. As you walk down to the front of the room and look inside the casket, you suddenly come face to face with yourself. This is your funeral 3 years from today. All these people have come to honor you, to express feelings of love and appreciation for your life. As you take a seat and wait for the services to begin, you look at the program in your hand. There are to be 4 speakers. The first is from your family, immediate and also extended, children, brothers, sisters, nephews, nieces, aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents who have come from all over the country to attend. The second speaker is one of your friends, someone who can give a sense of what you were as a person. The third speaker is from your work or profession, and the fourth is from your church or community organization where you've been involved in service. Now think deeply. What would you like each of these speakers to say about you and your life? What kind of husband, wife, father, or mother would you like their words to reflect? What kind of son or daughter or cousin? What kind of friend? What kind of working associate? What character would you like them to have seen in you? What contributions, what achievements would you want them to remember? Look carefully at the people around you. What difference would you like to have made in their lives? So I believe that a eulogy is saying a good word about someone. That's the point of it. And you've all been to services where somebody comes up and does that. An obituary is about more your accomplishments, what you've done in your life. So take a few moments, just maybe on the back of your handout there, the handout looks like this, or just scratch it in the margins of your paper. Just take a minute, say, and what would you like to have said about you, right? What kind of person are you, or are you becoming? I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it, right? Just jot those things down, and then we'll move on. So along that same line, a popular writer now, he's on PBS. His name's David Brooks. He did a TED Talk on the difference between resume and eulogy virtues. So here's the talk. It's about 5 minutes.
I was thinking about the difference between resume virtues.
I couldn't resist, right?
I mean, every time I watch that, it's like, wow. You pull something new out of it. It's David Brooks. It's on TED Talk. I think it's eulogy virtues or something like that. For those of you who watch PBS, he's an expert on PBS that comes in and talks about national and world affairs. So he's really done. So if you think about your eulogy is what will they say about me? And it's really more of these kinds of personal qualities. I figured it out the other day. I've done almost 120 funerals in my ministry time, memorial services, that kind of thing. Very rarely does somebody come up and read off the list of accomplishments the person has. You might print that in the obit, they went to school here, they did these things, they owned this or had that, or, achievements, accolades, accomplishments, all those kinds of virtues. They're important. I mean, you spend a lot of your life earning those and striving for those. But after a person passes away, it's very rare that somebody says, and they were a great CEO of the company. They talk about what kind of integrity they had, kindness, love, integrity, what a friend they were because they were loyal and devoted to their family and those kinds of things. So I think as you consider, if I was at my own funeral, what would I want them to say about me? My suggestion for you is this. Live that way. Make it so obvious that you are a great lover of people. Make it so obvious to them that you are kind, that you care about others. Make it so obvious to them that every person in the room would go, well, of course. Boy, do I have a story to tell you about that. You remember that one time? And of course, those always lead to great stories because that's the evidence, that's the proof. If they're not sure if you were really a generous person, you probably weren't, or not as much maybe as you could have been, because they just, eliminate all doubt on those kinds of things. So my homework for you, and you always have to give homework. I'm a former school teacher. I know people who have written their own obituaries. As a person who is aging in life and who has a 24-year-old, I have to remind him, your mom and I had a life before you came aboard. I didn't know you did that. It's like, I did that when I was 20-something years old. I don't go back to those days very often, right? I can't even remember a lot of that stuff anymore. But when you sit and think about it, you do write these things down. You do say, well, I did these things, and they'll go, wow, I never knew you did that. It's like, well, that was a long time ago. That was, several chapters ago in my whole life. They only know you from a certain time in your life when you were this person. That's not who I was 30 years ago or 40 years ago, or it's not who I am today. It's just different. Your life changes. Your life has chapters to it. So some of those chapters, you can go back and reread them. You can't live there, but it's nice to remember. And it's nice to remind yourself of what you've accomplished. I think writing your own obituary is a great form of gratitude, because as you look back on your life and you do see the things you've accomplished and the things you are proud of, it's like I've had some things that I think are worthy of mentioning, at least for somebody to remember. I think you can be very grateful for the gifts you have, the abilities you've been given, the time, the sacrifices other people made. we should probably do that more often. Think about your life. Where have I been? Who's been with me along the way? Who was there in those days? Grateful people end well. Grateful people end well because they don't end with bitterness and resentment and anger and that can happen along the way because you accumulate some of those things. But grateful people end with, I've had such a great life. It hasn't all been good. They're truth tellers. But on the whole, what a blessed life I've had. God's been with me all the days of my life, right? So I think this is good practice for a lot of people. The resume, virtues, what did you do? Accomplishments, achievements, accolades, lay it out there. The resume, virtues, this is who I am. Usually they talk about those things. A listing of your family. I know for me, I found out by reading some obituaries that my mom had collected of her grandparents, because she was alive when her great-grandparents lived. She kept the obituaries. I found out things about what would be now my great-great-grandparents that I would have never known without reading the obituary, because it's had preceded in death by its history. Yeah, it's history of your family. And I found out that my great-great-grandparents on my mom's side are buried here in Leavenworth. They're out at Mount Muncie. I just saw the tombstone the other day when I was out there doing a service. I wouldn't have known that if I wouldn't have read an obituary about her grandparents, because they listed the family. So it's a good thing. So here's your homework. Write your own obituary, even if it's just a rough draft. You'll want to add to it and change it and those kinds of things. It gives you a chance to live your life well. Live your life so that when the day comes, no one will question. I mean, you could pick anybody out of the crowd to say, well, what did you think about Dave? And they say, oh, here are your qualities. And they won't say, oh, he did these things too. It's like, because that won't matter as much. And then I encourage you to speak to your spouse, your kids, your family, your associates, your colleagues. If you know that about somebody, if I said, hey, would you do my obituary for me and do my eulogy? Tell them those kinds of things today. You don't have to wait until they die to tell them what a wonderful person they are, of what I really admire about you and respect about you. And, you've always shown this quality. You've taught me a lot just by being you, and I've learned how to become more, whatever the quality is, more generous, more faithful, more loving, more devoted, a hard worker. Those are the things that you usually hear about. Like, I get to hear a lot of stories. I meet with families. I never met the person who passed away. I'm just doing their service. So one of the things I like to ask them is, well, tell me about the person who passed away. What were they like? What do you admire about them? What makes you smile when you think about them? Those kinds of questions. And, sometimes I leave the meeting going, I wish I would have known that person. What a terrific person. And that it didn't sync up for us, this side of eternity. So tell them now. Why do we wait until they're gone to say a good word about them? Don't you like appreciation and respect and gratitude for who you are and, sometimes what you've done, but more who you are. Just you're that kind of person. So I think our lives would be better with that. I want to read a little poem to you. If you've done this before, it's worth repeating. It's on the inside page of your packet. It's just turn the front cover and you'll have it. It's called The Dash. Do any of you know The Dash? Do you know this work? So if you don't know it, it's great. If you've heard it before, it's like, oh, I love The Dash. So here's The Dash by Linda Ellis. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on the tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted that first came the date of birth and spoke the following date with tears. But he said what matters most of all was the dash between those years. For that dash represents all the time that they had spent alive on earth. And now only those who love them know what that little line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we live and love and how we spend our dash. So think about this long and hard. Are there things you'd like to change? For you never know how much time is left that can still be rearranged. If we could just slow down enough to consider what's true and real and always try to understand the way other people feel, and be less quick to anger and show appreciation more, and love the people in our lives like we've never loved before. If we treat each other with respect and more often wear a smile, remembering this little dash might only last a little while. So when your eulogy is being read with your life's actions to be rehashed, would you be proud of the things they say about how you spent your dash? So some things to consider. So a show of hands here, because I'm just around the audience. Shifting gears here to memorial service, funeral service. Just quick show of hands. How many of you have made arrangements in the past for someone who's passed away? Just a quick show of hands. Okay? I was telling Kristen up here, at a certain season of life, when your parents have passed away, you've probably done that. And if your parents haven't passed away, it may be somebody else, a sibling, or it's just somebody along the way. So some of this won't be new to you. It'll be like, well, yeah, I remember doing that. So here's what I like to do. Just take a minute or two, and the people at your table, say the names of the people that you did arrangements for, right? It was my so-and-so, his name was, or her name was, and just do that, and we'll do that, just at your table. And if you're sitting next to somebody you know who knows what you're gonna say, pick the person on the other side who may not know you as well, all right? So just take a minute or so. Ten seconds. All right, I'll call you back to order here. So one of the things we learned during COVID, I'll take you back to recent history, when we couldn't meet together to have services. I don't know if you remember that. Only 10 people could be at the funeral home or the church, and that included the funeral home director, the pastor. So, it's like, who in my family are you going to leave out? You're going to leave out, is it only the children because you had a big family? Or is it which grandkid isn't going to come? It's like RSVPing where you get a +1. That's it. It just didn't help. And then people were just left there. It's like, well, what do we do? I mean, we need to do something, but because a good funeral is really important. We use the old cliche, funerals are for the living. That's true. I mean, if your loved one who passed away was a person of faith, you shouldn't, you'll mourn them because you miss them, but don't mourn them because of where they're going. They're better off now than they've ever been, so that's a good thing, right? But we miss them. So the funeral's for us, the service is for us. We want to celebrate them. We want to acknowledge with joy and sorrow. Our tears say a lot about how much we love somebody, so never be ashamed of that kind of thing. It says a lot. Your body language says a lot in those kinds of days. In our society, we've gone almost so far to the idea of we want to celebrate life that we don't want to acknowledge the sorrow and the grief and the sadness that comes along with it. So I think a really good service is a balance of both. Good memories, sweet histories, those kinds of things, but also an acknowledgement of where we are at now, and also an acknowledgement of God has a lot to say about life and death and life after death. So if they're a religious person, I'm assuming a lot of you are. Well, I know a lot of you, so I hope so. God has something to say about that, and that's part of the pastor's role or those kinds of things. Grief, when you experience, also will churn up other grief that you've had, memories of people who have passed on or people you miss, and so that's a natural thing too. So it's good to kind of remember them. I see people in a nice springtime service when you go out to the cemetery. They'll linger for a while. They'll walk around and they'll point out to the grandkids. It's like, well, this is where my grandfather was born, and they'll go, man, he was really old, because they can do the math. That's important. It brings families together that way. It's a good thing. And the conditions that a person dies in makes a huge difference in the style of service, the mood of the service. So let me just give you some general examples. So the death of an elderly person whose time had come. It was just her time. Lived a really long life. Okay? That's That happens. The death of a child. I can't imagine something worse than that. And I know some of you have probably experienced it with just the numbers we have. If you do the numbers, I'm sure that's somebody's experience. A baby, yeah. The death of a person who had a sudden death or a shocking death. They walked through the front door, had a massive stroke or a massive aneurysm or a heart attack, and they were gone just within a matter of minutes. Couldn't believe it. I just talked to them yesterday or a week ago. I saw them at church, and now they're gone. What do you mean? A car accident? If there's violence involved, like a murder or something like that, a random drive-by shooting, wrong place at the wrong time, that's a lot different than grandma lived to be 96 years old and died in peace in her home or surrounded by loved ones. Those are totally different circumstances. A person who's chronically ill, who has had time to prepare, cancer or you pick the disease. Death by suicide. What about the death of somebody who, so like maybe they grew up in Leavenworth, but they lived most of their life somewhere else. Or for those of you with military background, we've lived all over the world. Where do we call home? Where is our final resting place going to be? Because we've traveled for 30 years doing our service. Where is home? So those are all kind of different conditions, and they matter with what the service looks like. Just a real technical term, the difference between a memorial service and a funeral. A funeral has a corpse or a body. A memorial service doesn't. So it's really kind of simple. My first year in ministry, I had to ask that question. I didn't know. I didn't have a clue of any of that kind of stuff. Some people will ask this, is there a difference if there's a body there? Well, what about if, I don't want to be cremated, how's God going to recognize me if I don't have a body? Or what if a person dies and they have had a horrific accident where their body has been disfigured? What about people's like, I don't want to do organ donation because I just don't want to do that. So here's theologically speaking. When you die, your body is just the shell of who you were. If we believe that God created the first human being, Adam, out of the dust of the earth and breathed life into him, don't you think he can do the same thing with your ashes? When you go to heaven, you're going to get a recreated resurrection body. So what it was when you passed away doesn't really matter. And that's personal preference, right? Cremation or corpse, you choose. It's your life. You make those decisions. Death is always sacred, but it's not always dignified. People don't always die in the most dignified way, because that's the nature of death. Death is ugly, and I don't think we ever want to get used to it either. So those are important. There's a financial consideration to the purchase of a casket and cremation. People who haven't experienced death are often shocked at how expensive it is to do the business of death. So I just want to throw that, and I'm not dissing funeral homes or anything like that, but it costs a lot. It really does. I'm a very frugal person. I've already told my son, why would you buy something that cost $8,000 to be seen for 24 hours? No way. It's like, that's just me. It's like, I'd rather have you have that money. Just cremate me and put me in a nice urn, and that's that. So here are some things to consider for your service. And this is where in your handout, what I did was I just made a copy of like the planner sheet that I use when I meet with a family. This is the exact thing I use. So for some of you, it will have way more detail than really what you know or care to know. But I think somewhere in there it'll be useful to you. So one of the first things, who are you working with? A funeral home in town? Are you going home? Like, hey, I'm going to be buried in wherever home is. And so they're going to handle the body, or they're going to do the service. And then, of course, if you're a church person, the church. Your direct point of contact will more than likely be the pastor. So that's just to be aware of. I think when a person dies, if you contact a funeral home and then contact the church in a respectable amount of time, you don't want to lag for a couple days, but you don't have to call them like right away either. An appropriate time. Just a note, I always figure it this way. I, as the pastor, I'm in charge of what happens during the service. That's my authority area, regardless of where it is. So at the cemetery, the service, the funeral, at the church, that's my realm. At the funeral home, what happens? That's the funeral home's place. I go in there and I help serve the family in that space. What happens with the hearse and all of the getting there and getting to, that's their job. And, there's a bit of stay in your lane for some of that. And I understand if you're doing a meal at the church, I have no domain over that space right over there. So it's like, just stay away, right? Whatever they say goes. And I don't even want to put my 2 cents in because someone will say, well, the pastor said that. It's like, I didn't say that, seriously. Casket or cremation, that's a choice you'll need to make. Visitation the night before is often nice for people who can't be at the service. They have to work or they just can't make it. They have another something going on. But we would love to come by and pay our respects to the family. We'd like to see you, maybe meet each other and talk to each other. So that's a nice practice to have. Having the visitation like 2 hours on the day of the service, if I can't be there for the funeral, there's a pretty good chance I can't be there 2 hours before the funeral either. I'm just out of town for the day, out of something where I have to be gone. So it's just something to consider. The service itself, where is it going to be? Are you going to have it at the funeral home? Is it at the church? Do you want to do an outside service? Those kinds of factors. Just think those through. Keep in mind the restrictions of where you have the service. Who's going to officiate it? Is it the pastor? Is it a family friend who's a pastor? Is it a family member? I know I've done services where the grandkids have played a pretty significant role in the service. If that's your family, then good. Maybe that isn't your family. You have to decide those things. Who's going to participate as part of the service? Are you going to have a eulogy spoken for you? And will several people do a eulogy? We've had several services where grandchildren have done the eulogy, and they've just been, I'm sitting there just listening almost in awe of like, man, I'd be less like weeping like a baby. And they're just telling, they're funny, they're witty, they're sincere, just love them. They're so wonderful. I remember having a few family members that have sung or played at a service. And I'm thinking, man, I could never do that. I'd get like to one note in the introduction and I'd be done. I'd just be, well, some of you know me pretty well. I'd be melting like an ice cube. So you got to know who your people are too, right? Scripture. When my mom passed away, my mom died in 2009, I was on the other side of the table. Instead of being the pastor, I was the family member. And so the pastor was asking me all the right questions. Well, did your mom have a favorite scripture? I didn't know. It'd been 20 some years since I'd moved away from the house. And well, what about favorite songs, music? It's like, I don't know. I know she liked to sing. So the lady in our hometown who knew my mom's favorites, the organist at church, said, when we do him sing, M.A. would love to sing. Precious Lord, take my hand. It's like, all right, check. And the pastor knew that kind of stuff. They checked around, so that's a good thing. For some people, the music's more important than what's said. The kind of songs, the style of songs, who's going to do them? Is it all recorded music? You can have Elvis sing at your funeral if you want. That might be right up your alley. Oh, he's going to. All right. Thought that through already. And that's one of the great things about technology. Always keep in mind that place matters when it comes to those kinds of things, so style. So for example, if a loved one of yours is Catholic, you're probably not going to have Hit the Road Jack as you're leaving the service. I think the priest would give that no, that's not going to happen here kind of thing. Yes?
Just as a point on that,
Sure.
I went to a funeral where the deceased was loved baseball, was a former high school and college baseball coach, and they played Take Me Out to the Ball Game.
There you go. Take Me Out to the Ball Game for a guy who, well, near and dear to my heart. Is that appropriate? I think that's one you talk to the pastor, you talk to the family, and everybody's in accord of saying, that really fits. I mean, could we pick a better song than that? That's perfect. It's like that just, who doesn't love that? Everybody who knew the person would know that about them. Of course, it was his favorite song. I totally relate to that. So those are decisions you need to make as family. in accord with whoever's leading the service. Just keep that in mind. For those of you who remember, during COVID, we postponed some services and did like a celebration of life like a year later, right? So for Dick Shoemaker's service, Brenda had selected for pre-service music all Motown songs because she said that was Dick's music. And died there. It was a lot different to have Motown music playing a year after he died than 2 days after he died. 2 days after he died, doing the service, I'm not sure that would have been appropriate. It just wouldn't, to me, that wouldn't have felt right. A year later, a lot of that grief has been, you're rolling with it. It's just, and it was fun. There was joy in it, and that's a good thing. 3 days after they pass away, that's pretty raw. So, those are just decisions you have to make. Poems or readings, who will deliver the eulogy, military, cemetery stuff, like are there going to be taps and gun salute and flag presentation? I know here in Leavenworth, that's a really important thing. Were they part of Masonic Lodge or, any of the groups that have kind of those types of ceremonies to keep in mind. If you do a cremation, one of the things you might want to talk about as a family is where are we going to scatter the ashes? So I had a family, this is quite a while ago, maybe 15 years ago. They were from Western Kansas, and mom was she was our church mom. She was just a sweet, wonderful lady. And she passed away, and her adult daughter was part of our congregation, and the service was packed. It was like standing room only. And Joyce was cremated, and what Michelle had decided, the adult daughter, was we're going to scatter mom's ashes this summer back in our hometown when we have our family reunion. And I thought, that's a wonderful idea. That way everybody can participate in it. And you can stand around and tell stories and share memories and just all of that. And it's not everybody has a life where they can just drop everything and be halfway across the country in 3 days or 2 days. They just can't do it. But we'll make sure we're at the family reunion, especially for an event like that. When we're scattering grandma's ashes, you better bet we'll be there. We'll just make it work because you have enough time. And then the intentionality of it. And so that's one of those, I was just at a retreat, and one of the ladies who was there had her husband's ashes scattered at the retreat center where we were, because she said for Richard, this was a very special place for him. And that really mattered to her, because those people who come year after year after year to that retreat center were her core community, is what she called it. So kind of like her chosen family. So that makes a difference. Yeah. Legality, I'm not sure about all that. I don't know if that's one where you got to have the human shield and kind of just scatter them when nobody's looking. I don't know. That's one of those, check with your local authorities. Don't get in the police blotter because it's like, what were we doing? What was wrong? Just cop happens to be going by. That's a good question. Haven't thought about that. Yeah.
What I was going to say is that when my father-in-law passed away, my daughter was only 5.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very difficult for her to understand why grandpa was gone, and he was gone within 2 weeks. So at the cemetery, I thought I had read that balloons were really good for children. And so we did a balloon release, and I didn't realize how good it was for me. And so anyway, we had military, because he was Korea. We had military information, and then at the very end, we had a balloon release.
So a balloon release, if you have like really small children, or something like that that's a little more concrete. It's an image of letting go and kind of rising. Again, that has to fit your family, right? Your family, I know families would be like, we would never do that. And other families would go, oh, that's just the best part of the service when we did that. So you got to know who you are and what your family's like, those kinds of things. It's a great gift to your family to leave this kind of information. They don't have to make decisions about what songs or what scripture or where do you want to be buried, or, you've decided those. Just like your advance directives, you've already decided, just follow the plan. It's the same kind of deal for the funeral too. In general practice, and we just have a couple minutes and we can do some Q&A, meeting with the pastor usually if it's a funeral, there's a timeline to it because it needs to be handled within a reasonable time, because you do have a corpse that has to be dealt with. If it's a Cremation, where you can do it really anytime you choose. The urgency isn't quite as strong. I was in summer school one year working on a graduate program, and one of the patriarchs of our church passed away. His name was Harold. And they called and said, well, Dad has passed away. And I said, well, I'm here for a month. It's like you can't just leave and go back and do the service and come back, because it just was, it's all pastors. We'd all just be coming and going because life goes on, right? And I said, I feel so badly, because that's when, you need your pastor. And I knew Harold. Harold was a terrific guy. And they said, we talked about it, which I love that. We talked about it, and we'll just wait till you get back to do Dad's service. And it was like, I'm part of the family, just for that little bit of time. But they could do that because it was cremation. If it would have been we have a body and there has to be a timeliness to that, I would have had to have just handed it off to somebody else, and they would have done well, but I wouldn't have gotten to participate. So those kinds of things. Leave them good plans. And here's my last thought on that before I conclude, and we'll do some questions. Tell your people where your plans are. They're in the red folder in my desk drawer, and then show them the red folder. Someone will go, oh, Dad's desk, that's where all his stuff is. And for those of you who remember Inga Cochran, I know some of you long-timers remember her. So I didn't know her because I was pretty new on board, and she had done her service. She had laid it out, order of worship. I think she took it right out of the hymnal and just put in all the information. She had done that probably 12 to 15 years before I came on board, because the previous pastor, his name was in all of it, right? Pastor Tim. But the plan was still good. So then all I had to do with her the only child, right, Barbara, was say, what of this do you want to keep, and is there anything you'd like to revise or change? And she said, well, it's pretty solid. I would like this song instead of that, but besides that, let's just do what Mom wanted to do. And she had so many decisions to make of all the other things that were swirling. None of that had to be decided on because it was already chosen. So I thought that was a wonderful gift that her mom gave to her and the rest of her family. So we have some time for Q&A. I'm sure Marcia will tell me when it's... This is the one time you got to tell the pastor, that's enough.
Oh, no.
Questions, thoughts? Ready to take a break? Jimmy thinks I'm doing very well. I'm going to stick around for a while. All right. 2 times on Sunday. So tip your waiters. Sure.
And maybe there's not a good answer. When somebody gets married, it's traditional to tip the preacher and maybe pay a fee for the church. Do you think that when people die?
If you work through a funeral home, that's usually just part of the payment schedule. And it's just a set fee. They just fold it in. So if you don't work through a funeral home, it's like we're taking care of all the arrangement. It usually is. It's an acknowledgement of the time that's invested in it more than anything else. Would a pastor probably do it for nothing? Yeah, they probably. I would think they would. It's the same way with like people who play. It's like, well, we have somebody to play the organ, or we have a musician come and play. That we've invited them to do it. I think you acknowledge their expertise, their skill, and also the time invested. I know people that will sign the check and just say, I'm doing it this is my gift to you. But I always figure, let them decide that. Maybe they need the money, or maybe they're saving for something that you have no idea about. So, yeah, it's appropriate to do that. And usually it's local custom of how much and that kind of thing. Jan, please. So the question was, does the VA have any of this kind of stuff available if that fits and Liz will talk a little bit more to that in just a little bit. Mm-hmm.
Share one more thing. My mother-in-law passed away on the 22nd of December. We don't even remember that Christmas. So something like this would have been wonderful. So that's what I was going to say, is just this would have been a fantastic tool to have for her. I remember digging through her room, looking for things. We stayed up till 2 or 3 in the morning trying to find this, that, and the other, because she did not have it in a certain spot. and it was extremely stressful.
So when someone passes away, and for those of you who have had people pass away, you understand that fog of grief is just, I can't think of anything. My concentration level is just terrible. And you just really struggle to even just think well.
It's the holiday.
And it's the holidays, because her mother-in-law was like the 22nd of December. And just what a gift it would have been. It's like, oh yeah, Mom's folder. She kept it in the drawer right next to her Bible. And she told us, every time we saw her, she told us that. And so you don't have to comb through her Bible going, I wonder if Mom had a favorite passage, and you're flipping through it hoping to just get lucky. It's already thought through.